really good to be here. Thank you for coming out, and thank you, Dr. Gray, for that wonderful introduction, and also to the board and staff of the Jefferson Educational Society, especially Ben Spagan, who's my new best friend. And I also want to thank Jim and Deborah Fallows. I know they're not coming till next week, but it was in a conversation with Jim about his work with the Our Towns Foundation that I learned about this event and was introduced to Ben. And so thank you, Jim and Deborah, for making this. Oh, I'm sorry. I want to make sure I had some water. I dry up in a hurry at this age, you know how it is. So I was invited here, as Dr. Gray said, to speak because of my work at Hatchspace, which is a community-supported woodworking shop I co-founded in Vermont in 2018. And the reason that's important is the hope that my experience, rather short experience in the great scope of things, the hope it gives me for the future of trades and trade skills in our country. And the future is bright. I truly believe that, but it is not assured. And knowing what you do about me, you might rightly ask why a guy you mostly know from radio commercials and doing fart jokes on NPR has anything important to say on this subject. And to show you why I feel I do, I need to take you back to my upbringing and my childhood in Sturgis, Michigan. I was one of 6 kids and second oldest. And growing up, I never once saw a tradesperson in our house. Every weekend, my dad would try to stay one repair ahead of this crumbling old house that we all lived in. And of course, with 6 siblings to compete with, and my dad's job, which was 20 miles away, making heaters and air conditioners for the mobile home industry, competing for Dad's attention meant that if you wanted to spend time with him, you had to show up and do whatever awful thing he happened to be doing that weekend. So that's what I did. And my dad, he was not a great teacher or particularly helpful father. He would do something for a while I stood there, and then he would just drop the tools and walk away and say, "Make yourself useful." You'd pick the tools up and you'd do what you saw him doing, and that's how I learned all this, from chiseling holes through concrete blocks to pulling wires through walls. And that phrase, "make yourself useful," you know those things that your parents said that that voice never leaves your head? You know, like sit up straight, don't pick your nose, you know, all these things, it always is there. And that's one of mine. I ignore the picking your nose one, but that one I listen to. Make yourself useful. And through the course of my abused childhood, we jacked up that house. We tore out the old cast iron furnace and put in a modern gas boiler with copper piping running through the house. We rewired the place. We rebuilt the kitchen. We dug footers for a new garage. We tore down the old garage. I carried sheetrock, pulled rusty nails out of endless crooked boards. And I just thought that was what people did. My dad fixed everything. He even fixed our television. When the television would go out, remember the vertical hold, you know, and the screen would just flicker? My dad would take the mirror down off the hallway wall, put it on the sofa, and then be behind the TV so he could see the image in the mirror. And he'd fuss with stuff in the back until it straightened up, or maybe he had to go to the hardware store and get a new tube. And so I just thought this is just what people did. When things break, you fix them. And it wasn't until years later that I realized that my dad had no idea what he was doing. He was a refrigeration engineer. He'd never worked in construction. As to my knowledge, he'd never even been on a construction job. And he didn't have YouTube, for God's sakes. And still he did all this stuff. And he did it well. Looked good to me. Of course, I was 9, but it looked good to me. And I recognized that he was just making it up as it went. Now, it was probably a function of money. We never had a lot. And he'd never really had any. He grew up with a single mom and a mean older sister in the Irish neighborhood of Chicago during the Depression. And I think he learned at a very young age that you did for yourself or you did without. And now, doing without was not on the agenda of a people who had jury-rigged their way through a depression, built a great army, conquered the world, became the first in their families to go to college, had families, and put roofs over their heads. You know, they're called the greatest generation for a reason. They did things, but more importantly, they believed that they could do things. Sagging, or I should say, straightening up a sagging house in Michigan was just one more thing. Now, thanks to the GI Bill, my dad was the first of his line to go to college, and we were expected to carry on that tradition. I was indifferent, B student through high school. I went off to Michigan State because it was affordable, and I assumed that half of the 40,000 students there would be women. They were, and it proved to be the most interesting thing about my short college career. I took some English classes, creative writing, philosophy. Shakespeare, I think, is what finally drove me to the edge of the interstate with my thumb in the air, headed west. Just about 18 months after I'd arrived. You know, they say all who wander are not lost, but I was. I ended up in Alaska a year later, finding ever more storied ways to kill myself with one-syllable jobs: log, fish, drink. I never got paid to drink. I wasn't looking for anything. I was just looking. Logging sucked, but at least it wasn't Shakespeare. Commercial fishing was frightening and smelly, but the questions for further discussion were less reflective and more beer-related. My first winter in Alaska in 1976 found me working on a canning line in Petersburg, Alaska, down the southeast part of the state. Now, fishing smelled, but canneries stunk. And at the time I was working on that line, there was a construction crew building a new warehouse for the cannery right next door. It's a big 4-story steel I-beam frame. Middle of the winter, iron outside, jackhammers going all the time. And they'd come in the same break room we used for coffee break, and we'd be at our smelly little table and our rain gear and our little pimply faces, and that's what it felt like. And they'd be over at their table, and they'd be laid back, and they're talking, and they're joking with each other, and they're being easy with each other. And it's like, remember high school when there was like the table you were at, and then there was the cool kids table? Like, that was the cool kids table. I mean, you knew it. I wanted to be at that table. I just wanted what I saw there. Didn't really know what it was. I just knew I wanted it. And so one day, the foreman of that comes over and he says, "Are you afraid of heights?" And I said, "No." I lied. He said, "Well, we lost a guy." He never did say how they lost him. we lost a guy. We need somebody to do the high iron with Carrie there. And so I look at Carrie, and I said, okay. And so I walk out to the job site, and it's just like it's a mess of metal and stuff and welders and all this. And there's a ladder that goes up all 4 stories to the top beam. And Carrie says to me, I'll go up this one, you go up that one, and then we hand line these purlins up there, and we bolt them on, and we'll do that all day. Make sure you don't drop your gloves. So I climb up to, I'm so excited, right? I'm on the job site, and I climb up to the top of that ladder, and everybody's watching me to make sure that I'm not going to freak out or die. And I get to the top of the ladder and reach up, and I'm about that much short of being able to get my hand over the top. And so it was either climb all the way back down, not even knowing if the ladder went any higher, or jump. And so that still qualifies as one of the top 3 stupidest things I've ever done. But like the other 2, they were often the best things in the long run. And with that leap, I became a tradesperson. And that changed my life. And it has saved it at least twice since then. Now, if you can imagine Alaska in the late 70s. They just finished the pipeline. They opened it up and sprayed money on everything. Everybody got a school. Everybody got a bridge to nowhere. Everybody got everything. And I was really lucky to be there in that time. There was way too much work and not enough bodies to do it. Does it sound familiar? I mean, and that's what we're dealing with exactly now. Tradespeople were in incredibly high demand. You know, we used to meet the incoming planes and ferries looking to snag the summer workers right off the boat in the airplanes before they got to the smelly canneries and settled into their jobs. I mean, we just needed bodies. A monkey with a hammer could have gotten hired at that time. I think I did have one work for me for a short time. And I was 23 years old. I had 20 people working for me, and we built 13 houses in between 1979 and 1980 after never having built one before in my life. You know, my dad had set me up for that. I didn't know how to do it, but I believed I could. I can't swear to the customer satisfaction of every single one of those houses. As I like to say now, I was building housing. There's a difference. And I became pretty successful. I was making good money. And I was busy all the time. Driving around my pickup truck, clipboard, big shot, right? And that's when I first noticed the social strata that can be created by money and success. And this is when I learned that I was getting on the wrong side of it. It was the first time I took my truck into a mechanic to have servicing done. Nobody'd ever worked on my trucks except myself. But I had to do it. I just didn't have time to do it. And I took it into this mechanic, and he was a friend of mine. And when I handed the keys over to him, I could feel the change in our relationship. He was my friend, but now I was his customer. And he was my mechanic. And I didn't like the way that felt. And it stuck with me for a long, long time, and you'll see why as we get a little further into this. See, surrendering that, the word is agency. I wish I could come up with a better one. That sounds so intelligent. Well, maybe it's okay here, not the places I usually hang out. Surrendering that agency in my material life was, and it continues to be, really difficult for me. It's not because I'm cheap or a control freak or because I'm better at it than anyone else. It's because working in the material world isn't just what I do, it's what I am. I had to leave that world for a while to appreciate the power there is in that and the damage that can come when we ignore our true natures. See, booms don't last, and by 1984 I was scratching around for work with 100 other guys, most of them better than I was, and I had time on my hands. So, kind of on a request from a friend of mine who worked at the local public radio station, I started doing little comments on the local station. I'd write them on Sunday, record them Sunday night, and they'd air on Monday. And they're just these funny little things about stuff, falling down the parking lot, having my dog castrated. That was a riot. Going fishing, whatever I thought of. It was just nonsense, really. And that went on for, a few months. And I wasn't really paying that much attention to it. I had no aspirations there. And they had made their way up to the Alaska network, so they were airing statewide for a while, it's kind of like being the tallest building in Erie, and so, and I was standing on a roof on a building we were fixing in downtown Homer, tallest building in downtown Homer, both stories of it. And I'm standing there, hammer in hand, and suddenly the production director or the program director, I should say, from KVBI comes screaming up in her car, and she says, "Tom, Ted Clark from NPR's on the phone, and they want to put your piece on All Things Considered. They need your permission." So I think that hammer is still laying there on that roof. And it's not a story to tell struggling writers. But as quickly as I leapt into the trades, I was out. In a very short period of time, I had book deals with East Coast publishers. I had a radio show. I was doing these advertisements that everybody seemed to love and paid like crazy. And all that stuff became my job. Good work, if you can get it, right? Or is it? See, the first book that I wrote was a collection of this nonsense, and I had used a quote that I couldn't source because we didn't have Google yet, but I remembered the quote, probably something I read at a Reader's Digest on the back of my mom's toilet, and the quote was, you need three things in life to be happy: something to do, someone to love, and something to hope for. And that quote has forever been attributed to me because I couldn't cite it properly at that time. If you were to Google that quote, or just Google quotes by Tom Bodett, that will be the first one that comes up. And I feel horrible because it's not mine. It belongs to a guy named Alan K. Chalmers. Nobody's heard of him for anything else, but it's his quote. But it will forever be assigned to me, and I've just given up trying to correct people on it. They don't care. So what I loved about that quote was something to do, someone to love, something to hope for. And it was the do part, something to do. I mean, that little word is so powerful, right? I mean, isn't it about the first thing we ask each other when we meet? What do you do? What do you do? I mean, it's not like, who are you? Who do you love? You don't ask that. That's kind of creepy. And what do you hope for? Of course, you got to know somebody for a while before you ask a question like that. But what do? We lead with that, right? And we're comfortable telling people the answer to that generally. So what did I do? Well, I was successful by any measure in that business, but what did I do? Well, mostly I sat in an office chair doing nothing, worrying about deadlines, book sales, book tours. And in the meantime, I was jobbing out my entire life. I had friends that used to work with me who were working on my house outside the window, and I didn't even have time to go visit with them most of the time. No time at all. Totally stressed out, totally out of my realm. And I was exhausted all the time. I missed being really tired and sore. You didn't think you could miss something like that? Looking at what I'd built at the end of a day, books and radio, it's like mirages. You do them and then they're gone. It's just, there's nothing there. And the pride in that tangible outcome wasn't there. And it disturbed me because what I was doing seemed important. Other people thought it was important. Whoa, you're that guy. Oh, you're that guy. Nobody said that. Nobody said that when I told them I was building houses. Oh, you're the guy who builds houses. No, that's not what it is. But I do a stupid radio thing that vaporizes in the atmosphere, and I'm a great big deal. So it had to be important, right? Because people were treating me now like I was important. And I just missed working with people. I used to fantasize about being on the crew. You're up on the roof, you're slinging plywood around, you're hammering nails, you're making fun of each other, that joking, that just being easy with people. I'd fantasize about that. But I left that far behind. Even considering it like I was, felt like going backwards, like being nostalgic for being a kid or something like that. It seemed wrong. And I knew I had everything we're told to want, and still I was just hollowed out inside. And when you're hollowed out, you fill it with all kinds of thoughts. I thought, well, I'm in a loveless marriage. I'm probably depressed. I'm an alcoholic, all of which was true. But I really didn't understand what I could do about it until I finally had enough and hit my bottom, as they say in the program, in '92. And so when I stopped drinking 30 years ago, writing became more difficult. It is if you drink and you're a normal drinker, you have two or three drinks and you get pretty funny, right? Or at least you think you do. And it kind of takes that to write. You kind of got to think you got something to say. Alcohol really helped with that. So when I stopped doing it, I started looking seriously at what I was writing, and I knew what good writing was, and I was a pretty good writer, but I also knew what great writing was, and that remained out of reach. I kept writing, people kept paying me to do it, but employment does not equal enjoyment. And it was in those early years of my sobriety, as I sort of struggled to excel at my work and couldn't get any better, that I started working in my shop again, buy a few simple tools. I wasn't doing it for any real reason other than something to do. I knew a little bit about it, of course, from my history, and I recognize now, I mean, if you look back at like the arts and crafts movement of the 19th century and early 20th century, it was a reaction. It was a reaction to like the industrial age and everybody having this mindless work all of a sudden, and the products that they were able to buy were the sameness and mediocrity of it all. And what I started to realize that as my writing stayed mediocre, my woodworking kept getting better. And it wasn't long before I was a better woodworker than I was a writer. And still, it took me at least another 10 years to own that. I mean, moving to Vermont 20 years ago was kind of the last piece of it. You know, Vermont, like here, you're surrounded by these cherished hardwoods, you know, the legendary woods of furniture making, you know, walnut and ash and cherry and 3 kinds of maple. And I've got 20 acres of mixed hardwood on my hill. I mean, the wind blows down wood I used to dream about using in Alaska. I remember my first year there, I was feeding white oak into my wood stove. White oak, for God's sakes, you can't even get that stuff in Alaska. We're burning it there because there's too much of it. So there was that atmosphere of that quality and abundance of the material. And also Vermont had that heritage of craft and making things. You see it in all, as here, the old mill buildings, mostly empty, and the truly brilliant craftsmen who are still working there today. And while Alaska taught me how to make things happen, it was Vermont that taught me how to make things and to make them well, because I could. I didn't have clients to please. I could make whatever I wanted. Usually I'd make things for people I loved and I'd give it away. And there was no excuse for doing bad work. I say this every time I teach a class at Hatchspace. First thing I ask is, how many of you are going to be professional woodworkers? And nobody raises their hand. And I said, okay, so why would you leave a mistake that you can fix? I mean, why would you do that to yourself? There's no reason for it. There's just no reason. Because all we have here is time, and what we're making is for the sake of making it. And the idea of that is to get people understanding that the process of making the thing is where the heart of it lies. Now, 20 years ago, when people asked me, what do I do? I had this kind of mealy mouth thing. I was in transition, you know. It's like, well, I'm a writer and a humorist, a broadcaster. I do some work on NPR, and they would usually be like, oh yeah, I think my sister listens to that, and you know, and it always followed with a lot of explanations and caveats, and now when people say, what do you do? I say, I'm a woodworker. And even saying that right then has a meaning for me. It has an emotion attached to it. How long it took me to get back to that. That's why I'm here, because I didn't recognize that until just a few years ago, that that's what had happened to me, and that the best part of me was in that work, and that the years in my life that I wasn't making things, even though you might have seen those as wonderful years, and there was a lot of wonderful things that happened in them, that was not fully human. I was not fully who I am. I was doing the wrong thing for me. Now, you know, I'm reading a bunch of marginal notes here that I've made. I've had so many conversations since I've been in Erie, in fact, recently over at the community college. And every time I have a conversation about what I'm talking about here, we all lean in, right? Everybody gets this. This is not, I'm not saying anything you don't know. I'm just telling my story. And so I've spent the last 2 days scribbling all over my damn speech. And because I keep getting new stuff. Now the trades, as the saying goes, good work if you can get it. But the trades are not a get rich quick thing. They're maybe not even get rich at all. And I'm quoting Darren Walker, who does this lovely address. He's the president of the Ford Foundation. He says, the trades are necessary. He's talking about the arts, but I'm saying trades are necessary to address a kind of poverty that goes beyond money, a hunger that lives not in our bodies, but in our souls, a uniquely human hunger for dignity and for transcendence. Now it's a mouthful. That's a lot to say. The trades lift us towards this dignity. Today, we may be the wealthiest nation in the world, but there's a spiritual poverty that plagues us. So that's why this matters. There's a social philosopher named Richard Sennett. He's got a wonderful book called The Craftsman. If you like this kind of stuff, you should definitely read it. He says that people are most interested in things we can change. He cites data for that. But looking at in closed study experiments, people are in a room, the things that they make contact with most often are things that they can change. They can move it, they can color it, they can do something with it. We're wired for this. Material consciousness is that space. Like how I'll lay awake at night and I'll be thinking about something I'm making or something I want to make. And it goes through my head, not like I used to stew over my writing work. All that ever did was worry me. And I will be totally absorbed in that. And how time, when I'm out in my shop, will just stop. My wife left me alone one weekend 2 years ago. And she took the boys skiing because what I wanted for my birthday was 2 days in my shop without an interruption. And I went in there at 9 o'clock on Saturday morning, and the next time I looked up, it was 8 o'clock in the evening. I hadn't eaten. I hadn't done anything but work out there all day long. That has never happened to me before in anything else I did, sober. And that making gives us that presence in the world. I mean, you look how virtual our world has become, you know, the texting, the messages, the everything's in our phones. And the anonymity, or at least the belief that we have anonymity in the things that we write and do on the internet, where when you make something, when you shape something in this world, you leave your presence on it. You've made your mark, literally. And there's even this kind of a lost art of the maker's mark that we're bringing back at Hatchspace, where furniture makers used to always have a little inscription of some kind that they would put somehow on their piece as their sort of signature on it, the way a painter signs a painting. And we're bringing back that idea of the maker's mark. So people feel that pride in it. And so that the things, when they're making it, they understand, I'm going to sign this work, so I'm going to do the best job I can here. In that book I mentioned of Richard Sennett's, he tells a story. Degas, who was a painter, of course, said to a poet friend of his, whose name I forget, he said, I've got this great idea for a poem, but I just can't work it out. And the poet said, that's because poetry is not made of ideas, it's made of words. It's a craft. And you have to do it. You can't think it. So our challenge, and why I feel so strongly about this, is I may sound a little overwrought when I tell my story and how I came to my appreciation of the power of making things. What we need to do is to communicate that power and that the dignity that comes with it to the next generation of people who are going to take this up. You know, returning dignity to the trades is going to take a concerted effort, because right now we've had many conversations here tonight before I came about how do we get young people making decisions in their life in high school and college, how do we communicate to them that these are good occupations, these are good career choices? And I think we do it by demonstrating it. It's like bugs fly to the light, right? And it's like my journey back to woodworking and my acceptance of being a woodworker, not a writer, took so long because I thought it was a step backward. I thought that being a woodworker was less than. It was less of a creative medium. It was less important. There weren't the accolades. There wasn't the money. And it took me too long, in my humble opinion, to recognize how untrue that was. And we need to work on this, because a lot of people believe that, and too many young people believe that. And the timing is good for us to have this message to carry. Skilled tradespeople are in the highest demand that they've been in my lifetime. And we've known for decades that we were failing to enroll our youth in the trades. I mean, you talk to any old, carpenter or electrician, and they say, yeah, I just can't get anybody to come in and learn this. So when I retire, I don't know what's going to happen to my business. Well, we know what happened, because they retired, right, during COVID, and now you can't get an electrician to save your life. And because of that, we've got a problem, because we need these people. And when we started taking the shop classes and making them required in our middle schools, many of our high schools, and started producing knowledge workers, it was all a good idea. We needed the STEM programs. We needed all that, and there are good jobs in that industry. But we did it at the expense of the trades. And there was a lot of young people in our schools right now today, like me, who are perfectly capable of going to college and doing whatever dumb thing they teach there, but they don't want to. That's not how they're wired. They don't know it, though. That's the problem. They don't know it. Just like I didn't know what had me hollowed out. And I was a full-blown adult in an AA class, for God's sakes, and I still didn't figure it out for 20 years. But now that I figured it out, I can't unlearn it. So what happens to those potential tradespeople who never discover who they are? That hopelessness, that breeds discouragement. Discouragement brings despair. And there's too many people who feel hopeless. Where am I going in this speech? Here we go. When we opened Hatchspace before COVID hit, it was just going to be a community workshop, like a makerspace, shared workspace. We'll bring in a bunch of cool tools. People show up. We'll do woodworking together, have fun, drink coffee, and go home. And that worked for about a year, and then COVID shut us down. And when we reopened, everything had changed. People were coming in really wanting to learn how to do things. A lot of women came in. We have more women members now than we do men. I think a lot of women were trapped at home like we all were for 18 months, and they needed stuff fixed around the house, and they became frustrated. They couldn't get anybody to come. They weren't allowed to, and they didn't know how to do it. And by the time it was over, so many of them said, I'm not going to let that happen again. And they came in, I need to learn how to do this stuff. And we got some amazing stories of the women who've come in, and they're changing their lives, at least their attitudes about their lives. And so we went from being really a clubhouse for old white guys to a community center. And we became a community that's finding itself. I keep looking at it the way I looked at myself in those early years, finding my way back to woodworking. As people come in, we've got kids from the Boys and Girls Club making skateboards in this after-school project, and day by day, and it's almost, maybe I'm seeing things, it's almost like they're standing up straighter, their smiles are bigger, and they leave waving that skateboard over their head. They look like they're 10 feet tall and bulletproof. That's powerful. That's something. That has made a difference. A huge difference? I don't know, but it could. It could be all the difference for one of those young people's lives someday. And people pay attention to things they can change. I believe that. And I believe that these people wanted to be useful. Make yourself useful, right? That's my mantra. Maybe everybody had a dad like that. And another thing that Darren Walker, the Ford Foundation, had said is that we must invest in our ambition, in our aspiration, in that American spirit of ingenuity and sense of imagination that's always propelled this great nation forward. This is the argument for our times. How are we doing for time? Ben? Yeah, oh, we're good. We're still under an hour. That's amazing. Because I had a little story here that I wanted to tell that I could have skipped, but I won't. When I was growing up in southern Michigan, there was an Amish community, Shipshewana, just over the Indiana border. And on Palm Sunday, 1964, there was this huge line of tornadoes that came through, and it's very famous. And it went right through this Amish row, if you will, and blew up farm after farm after farm. And I remember driving around the day after in the family station wagon, and it was just like, oh my God. And then every Sunday after that, we'd go around, and by the end of that summer, it was all rebuilt. There's Amish came from everywhere. I'm sure from Pennsylvania and Iowa and all the other places that they have communities. And you'd go by, and there would be like 100 people on this job, like crawling around like ants with hats. And they're making beams, they're doing it, and then that barn would go up, and then you'd go by the next week, and the next barn's up. And by fall, all those barns were back up. And that, to me, whenever I think of like what is American greatness, that's the image I have. That's the image I have. When people take on what seems like an impossible task, they put their despair and their loss aside, and they work together, and they just do it. Either do it or do without it. That's what makes us great. Americans are problem solvers. We're workers. It's in our DNA. I mean, the colonists understood that. It's like learn the trades or die. I mean, many of our founding fathers were craftspeople. And our founders understood that America itself was a long-term project, that it would be crafted by many generations, and we're still working it. Do it or do without. My dad understood that, and I wonder sometimes if we still do. We gotta do it. Trade skills are an indelible part of our image as Americans. We're ready to think of ourselves in this way again. Wherever I go lately, I'm having this same conversation over and over. And there's something afoot. There's a broad recognition of the same thing. There's something missing. There's something missing. And I think it took COVID and supply chain issues and the construction pinch for us to really start to recognize what it is. And when you look at, like in the 1920s, the arts and crafts movement of the 20s was sort of, they wanted to return to an earlier, more authentic America. You know, the Gilded Age and all of that stuff was just too much for us. They wanted to go back to a real America. Does that sound familiar? You know, and I think when we say, make us great again, what we mean is make us feel good about ourselves again. And what that means is just make us feel good again. And when people are in that place, that hollowed out place, it's very easy to fill it with all of the wrong information, and there's too much of that happening, which we don't even need to go into. And another indelible part of our self-image as Americans is heartland America, our rural towns. And, you know, you look at any, you know, half the commercials on television, they're full of pickup trucks and combines, guys in hard hats swinging chains, there's welding sparks, you know, and then everything's handcrafted now, right? We've got handcrafted beer, I think we have handcrafted aspirin, you know, handcrafted vinyl seats. I actually saw that in a trial. Our vinyl seats are handcrafted. I mean, and there's a term for that, it's called craft washing, right? It's like green washing, where people are, you know, advertisers and are just trying to make all their products look as green as they can because we want that, right? We want things to be green. And now, because of this craft washing, this gives me hope because we want that. We want that value again. We want craft. We want to support it. We want to own it. And next step, we want to do it. And America's heartland and our heart is hurting, if not broken. Everyone feels it. We see it in Vermont. I'm sure you see it. Here, the downtowns are shuttered. Young people, you know, have gone. They didn't come back. The opioid thing came with deadly effect in our rural communities. All the good jobs left. What work there is service stuff. And kind of hard to feel good about yourself, a place like that, wouldn't you think? And it's very easy to listen to people who tell you whose fault it is. And so the question is, you know, can the trades and craft save us? I believe that our stars are uniquely aligned for yes. Completely save us, save everything, solve everything? No. But I think it can start filling the hearts we need to move forward. Like, you look at 15 years ago, 20, the rise of the maker movement. Maker spaces are popping up everywhere, right? I think there's a couple here in Erie. That coincided with the rise of the storytelling movement, the Moth Radio Hour and the Moth Live shows. So I've been involved with that. Amazing events. And this is humans reacting. They're humans demanding to be human. Nobody planned it. Nobody said, you know what we ought to do is we ought to have a storytelling movement. You know, that's not how these things happen. They just happen. And you need to leverage it, or history is going to judge us poorly, that we did not take advantage of this really important time in our history to reset the way we think about the things we do. The trades and crafts have waxed and waned in their authority over the years. One of the peaks of their existence was in the Middle Ages and the guilds in Europe, and that was the first middle class, were the skilled workers in the guilds and the journeymen who traveled around. And we are at another ebb there where we can return the dignity that's necessary to attract the people to take this on, because we all want respect for what we do. And you ask a kid what he wants to be when he grows up, he's going to say, a fireman or he's going to say a video game designer, but they will always name something someone that they see other people respect. That's what they want to be. And that's why it's on us to show that respect. And another thing that COVID did is it reset our relationship with the workplace. A lot of people are working at home now, at least part of the time. And that also is taking us back to the beginning. Workshops all originated in the family homes. That's where they all used to be in the beginning. And I read a statistic somewhere that something like 90% of small businesses are incubated in the home. They start as home businesses. And once again, people who wouldn't normally be home, they are now. So once again, and they're not commuting, they're not spending 2 hours or 4 hours a day in their cars, so there's some time here too that wasn't there before. Let's give them something to do. And this opening that I've witnessed for women, now women have become very empowered in recent years, if not provoked, right? And the trades have been very derelict in gender equality. And we've also been very derelict in bringing in people of color as well. This has to change. We don't look like, we being the trades, we don't look like a place that's welcoming for women, people of color, because you don't see them there, right? You don't see enough of them there. That needs to change. Vermont is one small example of what's going on. Somebody did the calculation that to fulfill the housing need and the general sort of building demand that's expected in Vermont over the next 10 years, we have to produce 500 construction workers a year. We have no infrastructure to do that. Got a couple trade schools, maybe could turn out 50, maybe 10% of that, 15% of that. But it's not like we can just say, well, then we'll do without, because you can't, right? You can't. We need skilled people to do this. We need the houses. We need the repairs. We need our infrastructure working. So people who do this and love it need to talk about it. There's a group in Western Connecticut, they call themselves Touch a Trade. And that came from one of their organizers, a contractor, toured Hatchspace a year ago. He said, this is brilliant. I want to do something like this in Western Connecticut, only I want it to be not a woodworking shop. I want it to be specific to all the trades. And so they did their first event 2 weekends ago, and I was down there for it. And they had like the plumbing booth, the electrician booth, the drywall booth, and they set up all these games. All the kids were there. They were having a ball. They had a cherry picker there doing tree cutting. They had every single trade and aspect of building that you can imagine. And I talked to the group before they opened the gates in the morning. There were 400 people showed up for this thing. And I said to all these guys who were, you know how trades guys are. Just like, what do you do? It's like, yeah, I don't know, I hang sheetrock. And that's it, right? And so I told them this. I said, listen, today, talk about not just that this is a good job, tell them why you like it. Tell them why you like it. Because this isn't easy, right? You guys have a lot of choices in your life of what you could do. And some of you have been doing this, I can tell by the way you look, for probably 40 or 50 years. And you made a choice every single day to do this. And that's what these kids coming in here today need to hear. Why do you love it? Why do you do it? And I'm not taking the credit for it, but those guys were so great that day. They were having so much fun. The kids were having fun. There were so many smiles on the faces. And it really felt like that 1 4-hour event moved the needle somehow in Litchfield County, Connecticut. That gives me hope. That was started by one guy who got the idea a year ago, and he made it happen. Their long-term plan, he's got a board now where they're sponsoring nonprofit now while they get their paperwork together. They're going to build a school. They're going to have summer camps. They've got all of this happening. They did that in 1 year. So I'm going to skip around here. There's so many things that make the trades and the crafts an appealing occupation right now. Look at the gig economy. You know, it's kind of blown up. You know, everyone's pension plans and all this. Everybody's jobbers, right? Everybody's doing their jobs. Well, tradespeople have always been gig workers, right? It's always been that way. It's feast or famine. It's just that. And now, the trades don't have to compete with the job security that they used to have to, that were offered by the insurance giants and all that. Well, they've probably still pretty secure jobs, but you know what I'm saying. And so it's a more level playing field than it has been. Like some of the things that were scary about going into the trades, whether working for another contractor or becoming one yourself, it was all up to you. You didn't have that sort of job security. You depend on. You had to fight for it every day. That's kind of what everybody's going through right now. So why not do something you love as long as you've got to fight for it? And technology also, like the same technology that I think is creating part of the problem with our distraction is also part of the solution. It's never been easier to network with other makers. You can collaborate with people all over the globe if you want, with design ideas, manufacture, if you're going to go that far with it. And if you're going to be an independent craftsperson, it's never been easier to communicate and advertise what it is you do. Put your stuff up on Etsy. I mean, look at the people who are doing that. Those are all just little people, most of them working out of their garages. And some of them are doing really well with it. So it's probably never been easier to make a living if you're a decent tradesperson. And what I want, we'll know we're getting somewhere when you ask that kid what he wants to be when he grows up. And he says, I want to be a plumber. I want to be a stonemason or equipment operator. When I grow up, I want to be a mechanic like Bruce. They'll get that message from us. We got to talk like that. And what I grew up to be was a woodworker, and I'm really proud of that. And I invite you to please join me in helping to create a secure future for the trade skills in our communities and in our country. If you want to email me, talk further about this, I'm at tom@hatchspace.org. Look at our website. As my dad would say, make yourself useful. Thank you. Wasn't as funny as you thought it would be, right? This is a new forum for me, and thank you for sitting through it.
I was going to say one more round of applause for Mr. Tom Bodett, woodworker. All right, so folks, an important part of what we do here is we take questions from you. So you'll see our helpful team walking through the aisles looking to collect your questions if you have them ready already. If you haven't written one, I'd encourage you to do that. If you need an index card or a golf pencil to write that down, please do ask our team. They are here to help you. Tom, that was fantastic. I think that there's so much that we can unpack. One of the parts I want to start with is I want to start about rural America, because you were talking about the heartland and how our heart is broken. There's an emphasis on the work that you do in rural America. Why is that?
The easy answer is because it's what I know. I mean, I've lived in small towns all my life. I grew up in a town of 8,000 people. Alaska, my towns were smaller than that. Brattleboro is 15,000. Big city life is hard to get used to, but I've adapted. And so if I tried to do this in Detroit or, Buffalo, I'd be lost at sea. I have no idea how a community like that works, honestly, but I do know how small towns work. And small communities are also, as I was saying, there's a great term that I read about Northern Ireland, and during the Troubles, they were worried after the peace talks were completed that the small towns, the villages, would never recover because they're just too small, too much hurt, too personal, and they called them their fracture points. And I use that phrase all the time now, and I think our rural communities are our fracture points. I think it's where we're a little broken. And there's no big program that's going to fix that, right? Because every little town is different. The last thing you want in your small community is for somebody from somewhere else to come in and tell you how to fix it, or worse yet, try to fix it themselves. So this is something we can do for ourselves, community by community. I think every small town out there has got someone like me, someone like the Mason Lord, the gentleman that I mentioned in Connecticut, who wants this to happen, who can go out and round up the people to make it happen. Another nice thing about small towns is so many of them have unused real estate in really prime locations. Their downtowns are underused, they're not used at all. And that's where you want these places to be. Brattleboro is Hatchspace is in a 38,000 square foot building right in downtown Brattleboro, and it's becoming a hub of activity there, which makes it very accessible for our population, for one thing, and it also creates business for all of the other businesses that are around there, and it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun being downtown where everybody is.
In practicing what you preach and being involved in local community, I know, and I think that's the thing I'm going to take away from this is Tom Bodett, woodworker, and to be proud of that and embrace that. But you're also Tom Bodett, local elected official. You're part of your local government. You ran for office and got involved. Can you speak a little bit about the importance of doing that, what that meant to you also, just being involved in your town and change in your town, listening to people in your town?
Yes, yes, thank you. That was one of the best experiences of my life. I served 7 years on our local select board, which is like the town council. It's got a rotating chair. It's 5 people, all equal in authority, and it was my first experience in any kind of politics, and I loved it. I just loved it. I had never done anything like it before. I was talking to a gentleman earlier who's a local politician from around here about once you realize that you can actually help people, like people call you with problems, and oh my God, I can fix that for them. I can do that. I can call the road foreman for you, and he'll come unplug your culvert tomorrow. It's a simple thing, but it feels good. And through the course of that, I came to recognize a couple things. One, when you're spending other people's money, you better be damn sure you know what you're spending it on and be able to explain it to people, because it's not your money. And that changed the way I look at public spending, and it changed the way I feel about where government can help and where it shouldn't be involved. And I feel that, like, you always want the support of your local governments, but for something like what we're talking about here, this can be done very easily with private money. We opened Hatchspace, 2 guys, less than $100,000 inside of like 9 months from when we pulled the trigger on it. Now, there's been tons of work and many, many hours and funds since then by a lot of really good people. But you can get it started with very little. And you can't do that with policy. Like if we decided tomorrow, somehow, that yes, we're going to put industrial arts back into school and every community of 100,000 or less is going to get a trade school, what would it take? 20 years, 30 years to get that done, even if everybody agreed that it was the right thing to do? We haven't got that amount of time. We can't get an electrician now. So we got to do, we need to do the thing now. Maybe it's not a woodworking school. Maybe it's like Touch a Trade. Maybe the person who gets inspired by this is a metal worker and he wants to do that as well. It doesn't matter what it is. As long as you're making something and giving people the experience of having that effect on their material world, I think it's going to work. I really believe that.
So was that surprising to you when somebody said, we want to do this but not woodworking? Or another way of asking is what surprised you along the way of launching Hatchspace in the early days, and what's been the most recent surprise as this continues to develop?
The amount of women who were attracted to it surprised me. I thought we would struggle with that. And we worried that we were going to be seen as an old boys club. And in the very beginning, that's exactly what we looked like. But that's not what happened. We started with, there was one teacher who was a woman, a retired cabinet maker, who was very devoted to trying to bring other women into her occupation all throughout her career. And she came to us after retiring and said, I want to teach here. And we started offering this women's only beginning woodworking class. And the women's only part was really important. It's like, how many of you guys have gone to a yoga class where it's like all 25-year-old women and then you in the back making those noises? And that's how so many women feel in a wood shop, because they haven't seen this stuff before. It's never been offered to them. And I love having women in the shop. They're so safe, because a woman, unlike a man, won't touch a tool she doesn't know how to use. I love that.
Sticking with the demographics for a second, the age range that you're drawing at Hatchspace, what does that look like? You know, do you have retirees that are getting involved in this, folks that are looking for a career change, looking for something different? What does the youngest member of Hatchspace look like?
Well, our youngest, our age is, to come in unassisted, you have to be 16, just because we don't have the staff right now we want to change that, but we don't have the staff to have younger people in there right now, unless they come in as groups. And we do work with, we do classes with the Career Center up at the high school. We also do these programs with the Boys and Girls Club. But we are struggling getting more young people in. We're really looking at how to make that happen. We think it's got to start with summer camps when kids are available, and doing fun stuff. The skateboard thing is such a hit, so we're trying to come up, what else do they want, you know? And so so the young people is a puzzle. And the BIPOC community is a struggle. I honestly didn't know that we had an issue, because I'm a white guy and I don't pay attention, and Vermont is a very white state. And so, well, we're not getting any people of color in here because there really aren't many. You know, even if 50% of the the people of color in Windham County came to Hatchspace, it'd still only be like 7 people, I thought. Yet, we had a woman, Shar Miller King, who's a black woman from Decatur, Georgia, runs a makerspace down there. Look her up. She calls herself the Wood Maven. She's got an Instagram feed that's so entertaining. She's so charismatic, and she's a woodworker, and she makes fun with everything. And we brought her up to do a week of classes, and more just for everyone. But we had 2 nights set aside while she was there that were specific. One was youth, BIPOC youth, and the other was BIPOC adults. And they both were filled with people I'd never seen before. And Char, understanding exactly what our issue was, I asked them during class and after, says like, have you been in here before? No, I haven't. Well, why not? Well, we didn't know if we were welcome. And it's what I was saying a minute ago. So we have work to do. We have work to do. We've reached out to the Roots Social Justice Center, one of our local advocacy programs, to come in and help us. What do we have to do to look like that you're welcome here, no matter who you are?
And I think the audience here wants to know, when you have that play in the playbook, can we take it? Because I've got so many questions here about that, touching right on that issue. And one here goes back to the youth. And I think hearing you talk about kids seeing this present, people seeing this present, and people seeing people like themselves present in the trades, that then we can lift that up. And this person's asking, how can Erie spark an interest in the trades and kids? Or we're just talking about the shop classes that this person knew as a child are no more. Unless a child is exposed to the trades, how will they know they even exist? And you know, blending that with another one, how do we make these as popular as going to college, getting a degree, advancing your education? How do we see that there are multiple pathways? We lift them all up and get kids to see this.
Yeah, that's the work. That's the work. And what was the first part of it? How do we
get kids interested in this? How do we spark an interest in kids?
Right.
And this person saying the trade classes they had in school, they don't exist anymore.
Right. Well, the exposure is the thing, I think. Like, you heard my story. I was exposed to this stuff at home, and then I had shop classes in my middle school. And when I went to high school, there were 5 industrial arts classes, what they called them, and to graduate, you had to take 3 of them. Everybody. There was wood shop, metal shop, drafting, home ec, and auto shop. Those were the 5 choices. And so everybody had to take something that they probably didn't want to do. And I took home ec because that's where all the girls were. That seems to be a theme. But I learned how to sew on a button, and I learned how to balance my checkbook in that class. And those 2 skills have served me to this day.
Where I learned how to make no-makes, and still a great cookie that I can make. So we got 2, I know we have great questions here, but we've got 2 great statements. One is, I craft, therefore I am. And this is from a potter and a former exhibitor out of the Shelburne Farmers Market.
Oh.
And then somebody says, I quilt and I love it. It's a hobby. And I think it's important to lift that up in this space as well, to talk about the people that are embracing that. And then I want to turn to a question that I know was something that had my house as a house divided, and it was unions. And so my grandfather was a mason. He was part of a union. My father was a coal miner, not part of a union. They were a house divided on that. This person asks, in your opinion, what role do labor unions play in developing and marketing trade skills? Where do unions fit into this conversation?
Well, I think they could be a powerful advocate for it. Whether they have the will to do it or not, I don't know. I don't know a lot about the trade unions. I belong to the Screen Actors Guild, not a very rough bunch. And the Radio Guild is even But I think that they could play a powerful role. Like you look at, the time is gone, but I mean, I remember I grew up in Michigan, for God's sakes. I mean, UAW, that was like, they were the bomb, right? And all of, that sort of union emblem was powerful. And there was pride in that. And I think that the unions, the construction trade unions, could play a powerful role in what we're talking about, bringing the dignity back by getting out in front of it, talking about that. Yeah, be a union electrician.
I think in the marketing and messaging of this, and you touched on it in your speech, the idea of, is America great? Do we need to make America great again? And I thought you had an excellent piece in American Consequences, a whole issue themed around America is great and always has been great. Two things stood out for me from that piece that I'd like you to touch on a little bit more. One is, and this is a favorite line of mine from it, man fires watermelon through Pontiac with homemade cannon. And the other one is, and I think this is the deeper thing to touch on, is the American spirit. Not being a can-do spirit necessarily, but a must-do spirit. And that's what makes our country great. And you relate that around trades and your vision of it. I'd like to hear you touch about that. Number one, the homemade cannon that's launching a watermelon, and two, the must-do spirit of America.
Well, it's all wrapped up in that story. I was standing in an airport somewhere, probably 10 years ago, and there's that crawl along the bottom of CNN News. And it said, man shoots watermelon from cannon through Pontiac. And it never returned. I never heard another word about it. Nothing, just that line.
So we don't know if it's a car, we don't know if it's Pontiac,
I don't know if it was
town.
Pontiac, Michigan, and he shot a watermelon all the way through town, or even more impressive if he actually shot it through a Pontiac, which were built. I mean, and so I use that as the theme of the piece that I was asked to write for that, is like somewhere that guy had an idea. And that the night before, he's out in his garage, and he's putting the finishing touches on it, and his wife comes out and says, why? And he takes a pull from his long neck strohs and he says, why not? And that is us. I mean, that is us. I mean, you read about this stuff all the time. Florida man, end the sentence. And maybe this wacky stuff goes on all over the world, but I know it goes on here. And this is how we end up doing the things we do. I mean, I always look at, if you look at the statistics of America in the 1930s, and you would have said that country is going to conquer the world within the next 10 years, you would be mad, right? But we did it. We just did it. Everybody just turned their attention, well, I guess we're doing this now. And we did it. We're not going to rest till we're making an airplane every minute. You can't make an airplane every minute.
And we did.
Yeah, and we did.
And so thinking about lifting up the trades here, this person's thinking about class and thinking about that maybe must-do attitude of there's a lot of attention paid from politicians on the working class. We got to bring back working class jobs, address working class. Where do the trades fit into that conversation if we hear from politicians we're trying to address the woes and struggles of the middle class, but we're not talking about trades at the same time? Are trades a different class? Do politicians need to reorient the message? What's the solution here?
Interesting. I don't know where the lines are. I think most tradesmen would consider themselves blue collar, but I think they would also consider themselves middle class. I think that, wage-wise, they're certainly in the middle-class income bracket. That working class, I think the reason politicians use it is because it's more of a cultural thing. yeah, he's a real blue-collar kind of guy. It's more of a tribal distinction, I think, than anything else. I think, you separate the trades from that at your peril, because it is a cultural thing. There's great pride in being working.
So, very specific question from a woodworker in the audience, noting first that wood is relatively expensive and slow to grow the material. Are there any futuristic recycled materials that excite you that have wood-like qualities? What is the future of wood from an environmental standpoint?
I have seen some of the synthetics they're doing now with 3D printers, and I don't like it. It does not look like wood. It does not work like wood. And to have a piece of wood like this is unique in the world. I mean, it is literally unique in the world. There is nothing like this piece of wood sitting right here anywhere else on the planet or in the universe. That's why it's so beautiful. And the thing I love about working with wood is it's sustainable, and it regrows, and it has to be harvested or it dies and rots, and it has to be managed. There's the woodworkers in Vermont, in fact, the Vermont Guild of Furniture Makers, which I'm a member, we will not use any exotic woods anymore because the provenance of the woods is uncertain. It was for a while. There was a certification stamp that you knew that the mahogany from Honduras was, sustainably harvested and all that. Well, then corruption took over. You can buy that stamp, and nobody knows. So ebony, the mahoganies, babinga, cocobolo, there's a bunch of woods that we used a lot that we just aren't anymore. And living in New England, the most beautiful, in my humble opinion, most beautiful woods in the world. Look at this piece of walnut here. It's just, babinga, go away. Yeah.
So I think the natural question is, when can all of Erie, Pennsylvania come up and visit you in Brattleboro, Vermont, and see you at Hatchspace? But more seriously, I'm going to ask one final question as we're almost out of time here, Tom. And I want to go back to that quote that you said, and I'm going to draw from that because, I think that's stuck with me, even though we now know it's not attributed to you of what do you do, what do you find someone you love, and what do you hope, to have something to hope for. But before I ask that question about hope, I want to thank the audience for coming out tonight, all of you, and the terrific questions and the dialogue and the opportunity to learn. I think you're going to have many fans and friends and followers from Erie, Pennsylvania, writing to you at tom@hatchspace.org. And again, I want to thank all of the sponsors that make the JES Global Summit possible, including tonight's sponsor, the community college right here in Erie. Big thanks to them for this event. And a reminder that we'll actually be right back here, right on this stage tomorrow night to talk about the Community Schools Initiative, something else very local, very powerful happening here in Erie, Pennsylvania. We'll be discussing that tomorrow night. And then on Friday, we head down to one of our other sponsors, Gannon University, to the Highmark Center to hear from Dr. Fiona Hill about her terrific book and the work that she's done in several presidential administrations. And again, a big thanks to our audience, big thanks to the JES team, our volunteers, and our board of trustees. Now, Tom, back to that quote: someone to love, something to do, and something to hope for. As we leave here tonight, what does Tom Bodett, woodworker, hope for?
More time in my shop. If you want to give up woodworking, start a woodworking school, I've discovered. But what I hope for, and I said it over and over, is for people who are suited to this work, find it. That's my whole mission. It saved my life. I think it can save a lot of others. And I hope that every community that hears about this at least tries to do something about it. We have Hooper, Nebraska, Hinton, West Virginia, Litchfield County, Wellington, New Zealand. I don't know why. They keep calling us and asking questions. You know, what are you using for a member agreement? We send them our member agreement. What do you do for this? Like, we're not franchising, we're evangelizing. That's what I say. I'm not selling anything except the idea. And what we hope to do with Hatchspace is develop ourselves into a position to be a resource for people who want to do this in their communities.
And a big, big, big thank you from the choir you've been preaching to here in Erie, Pennsylvania, Tom Bodett, woodworker. Thank you so much for joining us for the Global Summit.
Thank you for having me.